Trade efficiency with NACFE's Mike Roth and friends.
Here in episode 70, we're joined by Michelle Buffington. She's a vehicle program specialist at the California Air Resources Board, where we talk about the Modesto, California Frito-Lay CARB project, how her upbringing led to her passion for the work she does today, but also how there is a great opportunity for trucking to impact the environment. She explains how CARB works using a peanut butter and jelly sandwich analogy and shares some things she learned about trucking that surprised her. She closes the interview giving the industry some suggestions on how to move to zero emissions. Today we have joining us Michelle Buffington. She's a vehicle program specialist at the California Air Resources Board. It's a real pleasure to have you on today. I'm really interested to talk to you, Michelle.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Mike.
I'm really interested in learning more about CARB. And, I think for a lot of us, probably, my audience here and this, and then just maybe the trucking industry in general, we think we know CARB, but maybe like a lot of things, we know less than maybe we think we do. So I'm looking forward to just, using this time together to kind of learn more myself and maybe some others along the way. Do you remember how we met and we first met and become friends?
I do. It actually ties to the Run on Less campaign. So I believe the first time we met was over the phone, and you were getting ready to launch the first Drive on Less campaign, and you had called us because because CARB had invested in some of the fleets that were a part of it. And that year had been a really big year for CARB's demonstration and pilot projects. We had launched like the single largest competitive solicitation in the history of our agency, $205 million, to support an array of zero and near zero emission freight facility projects across the state. And we had applications covering everything from medium duty delivery trucks all the way up to a first of its kind battery electric locomotive. And the key component for us in these investments was really thinking about, in addition to driving technology and advancement and deployment, was really the replicability of the projects and enhancing how we share lessons learned. And at that point, NACFE and the Run on Less campaign had taken it a step further and worked with some of our fleets to share their perspectives on owning and operating the vehicles.
We were just together at Modesto, for a zero emission or near zero emission. There's a big acronym. You guys always have acronyms for things. But we were there celebrating Frito-Lay and having a whole bunch of electric and near zero natural gas trucks and so forth. And you and I were together, and we ended up, asking a lot of questions of each other and talking through things. But what was special about that day for you?
Yeah, it's totally true. The acronym for that particular group of projects is just a beast. And it was the Zero and Near Zero Emission Freight Facilities, or ZANZEF. I can't say that we were all really excited with how the acronym came out, but it certainly stuck and people remember it. But that event was incredibly exciting. I mean, for me, every time I see vehicles or equipment that we've deployed in our projects, and this pun is intended, it is electrifying, right? Like I just get goosebumps. And that particular project, the Modesto Frito-Lay project, is really a showpiece of CARB's demonstration and pilot efforts. To me, the energy, all the way from the staff who organized the event to the people whose passion kept the forward momentum on that project going, to the CEO of PepsiCo being there. I mean, you could really tell they were all in on the successful implementation of it. And quite frankly, Modesto, that was my first opportunity to see the Tesla Semi on the ground. So that was a really big deal for me. But that project also, through that project, Frito-Lay deployed 6 Peterbilt 220s, 3 BYD yard trucks, 12 Crown forklifts, and 34 of the Volvo VNL low NOx CNG tractors. Not to mention the renewable natural gas station that went with it, the 1 megawatt solar carport with energy storage, and the infrastructure to support all of the electrified vehicles. I'm happy to report now that all 15 Tesla trucks are on site and delivering chips and dips throughout the region. I think it's going to be a great Super Bowl with all those zero emission deliveries. So, there were a lot of reasons to celebrate that day, and I really can't wait to see how the project wraps up and to watch Frito-Lay continue to transform their fleet. I think we have some upcoming projects with them to continue the momentum here.
Yeah, we did one of a Cummins powered Peterbilt box truck was in Run on Less Electric in 2021. So my first trip to Modesto what was, I think, for the filming of that, which would have been in June of 2021. And yeah, I think what struck me that day is the very realness of a depot of the future, of of a place in the future. I think that day they announced that they're running 91% less greenhouse gas emissions, given all of that, all of those deployments and the solar and et cetera, et cetera. And that's huge. And we'll get to the point where those near zero natural gas tractors are either hydrogen or electric or something. And I don't want to get into that debate too much today, but yeah, jumped ahead of ourselves a little bit. So tell us about you. How did you, where in the Midwest did you grow up? We don't need to go all the way back to your birth and this, that, the other, but just like, what are some key things in your career that brought you to being so passionate about what you're doing today?
Sure. I grew up just outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I won't take you all the way back to birth, but I will say that was a pretty influential time, right? I grew up close to a steel mill that produced gas for production. And I mean, you could see the environmental impacts everywhere around me. And my mom was a huge activist in that space. And so seeing her passion for clean air really helped drive my interest in air quality. But the Midwest, when I was growing up, wasn't necessarily the most progressive. There's a lot of progress being made now and a whole lot of positive movement. But back then it wasn't quite, we weren't quite doing that yet. So I moved to California in 2001 because it's clear, it was clear then and it's clear now that they were leaders in the space. And I felt like there would be opportunities to make an impact. So at the time, the California Air Resources Board was already the premier agency leading the way, right, in protecting public health by reducing pollutants like NOx and particulate matter and toxics. But in 2006, California's then Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger signed AB 32, which really set the stage for California and for CARB to begin to address climate change by reducing the state's greenhouse gas emissions through regulation and market mechanisms. And that's where when I started my work. And I began my career here at CARB in 2007, working on the low carbon fuel standard. And from 2007 to today, that regulation has grown and changed quite a bit. But what I learned there and through the development of that with market-based regulation, I ended up getting the experience of working with industry on solving complex issues, learning how government operated and worked, and just how much of the economy and emissions are tied to goods movement. So, I gravitate to the work we do on goods movement and zero emission trucks for a couple of reasons. My mom and the air quality thing, but also, my dad was a tool and die guy for General Motors when I was growing up. And my grandpap was a big rig mechanic. So my work passion reflects my youth there. But primarily, and really what's driving me these days, is that there's so much space to have an impact here on the environment, in communities, and the quality of life on operators. I mean, from your observations out in the field with the drivers, I think you're hearing what we're hearing, that these trucks are so much quieter, there's less vibration, they're easier to drive, they require less maintenance, and at the end of your shift, you don't end up smelling like diesel. So to me, I feel this is an opportunity in a space to really make a difference.
So help me understand a little bit, and others around CARB. So you fund projects, but you also regulate. How does that work?
Sometimes I think about it like peanut butter and jelly. You need both to make a good sandwich, right? We have this opportunity. California, we're the fourth largest economy in the world. And that provides us some opportunity to make investments and really drive innovation in multiple ways. And so, when you're thinking about the complex issues that we have here in the state with, our poor air quality, our impact on the globally with our GHG emissions, we really need to take and access all the tools in our toolbox. And that comes through both voluntary and regulatory actions. And so the agency itself is in a position where we have groups that work on investments like you were pointing out, and those range from everything from demonstration phase projects all the way up through commercial deployments. Beyond that, into providing financing solutions for technologies that are very commercially advanced and on their way. But that can't solve the problem. It won't solve the problem alone. So part of what we need to do here is also implement regulations that help drive and continue to to support the deployment of the technologies. And that ranges all the way from light duty to heavy duty. You know, the Air Resources Board is primarily focused on mobile source control. We do have some stationary work in the place. We work closely with our air district partners to help regulate air quality and also invest in air quality in the state.
Very good. And, I think something that a lot of us miss that maybe work, a lot outside of California is how serious the air quality problem was and how urgent, we all talk now a little bit of urgent about, climate in general for the whole planet. But from an air quality perspective, the situation was really dire a number of years ago or a number of decades ago, right? I mean, I remember Vin Scully saying once, "Oh my goodness, there's mountains. I've been sitting in this booth announcing, Dodgers baseball games for 50 or 60 years, and now I can finally see the mountains." So, never having lived in California, visited, but I don't know. Let's just take a minute. Walk us back through sort of why this became urgent. This situation became urgent a lot earlier than other places. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And what's funny is I've only been at the Air Resources Board for 15 years. And there are still people within the agency who can recall those days of being surprised when they could see the mountains and watching the transition happen from the period of time where you couldn't see them to now where you can see them pretty regularly down in Southern California. I think California as a state has a lot of sprawl, and people here love their cars. And so I think a lot of why this momentum happened here first and why it was such a problem here, why air quality became such an important conversation to be had here is in part because of the car culture that we have here, but also we have major ports on the West Coast located here in the state. And that's a lot of goods movement that happens, not just to deliver goods here in California, but to deliver goods throughout the US. I mean, I think it's somewhere around 70% of the goods that come into the United States are coming in through those two ports down south. And so we've seen a lot of progress, and the Air Resources Board has been involved in a lot of ways, from regulating gasoline from it to become unleaded gasoline all the way up through catalytic converters to putting in standards for NOx on heavy duty engines. Those all have had drastic and positive impacts on the air quality here. And, we also as a state are looking and trying to figure out ways to make sure that this transition is happening equitably, right? And so there's been a lot of inequity throughout the state in the early days. And so now we have this opportunity and we're using it to really make a difference and improve the air quality in places where, goods movement is happening. And that tends to be in priority populations and communities that are more susceptible to and have higher exposure to air pollution.
We've done a little more work in California the last few years. I've been there more often, and it is interesting how many people are excited to kind of finish the job, because they've seen the improvements. They've seen that, these lower emitting vehicles, more electric cars, trucks, and those kinds of things really have an impact on air quality and GHG, and it all kind of just fits together, right? So forth. Hey, switching gears a little bit, one of the reasons I always like talking to you is that you do ask a lot of questions, and there are people though that ask a lot of questions, and they ask a question to ask another question and another question, and they really don't listen to the answers. Well, I find you really interested in trucking. And when I start telling you about drivers and fleets and this happened and that happened, and there's these parts of trucking where zero emissions and electric trucks are really hard because of whatever things like, recently, I think we were talking about how many of the truck owners don't own the depot where we're going to have to put charging. So how does that work when there's an investment that's for the long term? As you think about the work you've been doing in trucking, what are some interesting things about freight or trucks that you've learned in doing this work that might have been a surprise to you as you look back and think about moving forward?
The very first thing that always struck me is how many different names there are for yard trucks. It it took me forever to understand that when somebody was talking about a yard goat, they were also talking about a yard truck. They were also talking about a hostler, yard hostler. So that was one thing that was really surprising to me.
By the way, we settled on terminal tractors. So let's try to use that as much as possible.
Fair enough. I also work in the ag space. And so when I talk about tractors, I 100% all of the time mean an ag tractor that's going out into a field. I never mean a tractor like a truck tractor, but that's just, I guess, the reality of the job that we're in. But honestly, to me, like the thing that was most surprising to me, or one of the things that was most surprising to me about freight and trucks, is just the amount of logistics that go into goods movement. Really, it's been like the last 5, maybe the last decade that I've really been thinking about, from the moment you hit purchase online to the moment you rip open that box when it's been delivered, like how much goes into that. It's mind-blowing to me. And, my work has really given me the opportunity to understand that complexity, and really caused me to start thinking down to the drivers who make so much of this happen. And that's actually another reason why I really enjoy the conversations with you, because I think, we do have a lot of public process here at CARB. And I would argue that it's maybe some of the most robust public process that happens here at the state, with folks coming in, being able to provide feedback on our regulations, on our incentive programs, on the directions that we're going with policy. But sometimes it's really hard to reach and talk to specific individuals who are impacted. And so talking with you brings a connection to those drivers who are making this happen, and particularly in the goods movement space, where it's not necessarily a large fleet, but an independent owner operator situation. And so to me, like, it's just, it's surprising, but also it's been enlightening to understand who's impacted and how they're impacted, and understanding the complexities, just like you were pointing out about, not always being the landowners where the infrastructure is going to go in. We have some really, some may call them hurdles or barriers, but to me, they're opportunities, right? We have this huge opportunity to figure out a system in which owner operators will be able to have the pleasure to operate a zero emission truck in a place where they're now operating third or fourth hand-me-downs of diesel trucks. I don't know what quite the term is, and it's probably not hand-me-downs, but that's how it looks in my head.
We went a long time trying to find any solution different from diesel trucks. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, we do now have sometimes I say a plethora of solutions out there. We've figured out how to get natural gas trucks that can use renewable natural gas, and in places where we can burn that methane instead of just let it go out in the atmosphere from livestock manure to just landfills and so forth, to hybrids in some marketplaces, to early battery electric trucks. We're talking about burning hydrogen in an engine, to be, which will be more, environmentally better than petroleum diesel. But how are you, either personally or CARB, thinking about just how many of these solutions? So you just talked about how the industry is kind of complex, and now we've got a complex group of solutions. This is really challenging for fleets and manufacturers to really put the technology for the individual use cases that make sense. How do you view that?
Anything that is a combustion fuel is going to have tailpipe emissions, and they're going to have immediate impacts on the communities surrounding them. So you're seeing through our investments and through our regulations, really this shift towards zero emission fuels, whether that be battery electric and electricity as a fuel, or hydrogen as the fuel, and through fuel cell electric vehicles, because really zero tailpipe emissions and zero emission fuels is the complete package. You have a vehicle that, when it's traveling through a priority population, releasing no emissions from the tailpipes. And so, from from the regulatory, you're seeing it in how we develop our regulations and how we're investing our dollars, that while there are a whole lot of options and maybe some solutions that fleets are going to explore interim to this, that the end goal, we're really working towards sending that market signal that the end goal here for the state is zero emission.
Yeah. I think that that focus on zero, because I run into places where they're like, well, wait a minute. Why go all the way? Why isn't this good enough? But I think what we're going to see in the next few years is how powerful zero is. And what I mean by that is, we're getting to some levels on NOx and PM and GHG where it's kind of hard to even measure. So, but we have to if we're going to comply, right? So we don't have that with zero. Zero emission battery electric trucks, they don't have emission testing of their engines to do. They don't have other sort of testing and qualification and stuff. So I actually think that we're underestimating that value even in like the truck price, where I think we're going to find that building these electric trucks have a lot of overhead and indirect costs and just other parts of doing business that just does not apply to a zero emission truck. And we're gonna see those benefits, and that's going to be a big aha for the industry as we move forward. We'll see if I'm right. Hey, Michelle, we always run out of time quickly. As we close out, I mean, we all talk a lot about this work, but what are some things that we should do? I mean, so what's your advice for like actions that people out, really doing this work, where they operate trucks or build parts for trucks or build the trucks themselves, or maybe they regulate them or finance them? But what is your suggestion, given sort of all that we've talked about and all that you've learned, that you think people should do?
What first pops into my head is find a ride and drive. Bring your product. If you're an OEM, get your products there. If you're an operator, get your bodies there so that you can test drive the vehicles. Because honestly, I think seeing is believing in this case. You can talk about total cost of ownership. You can talk about how great these trucks are. But until you sit behind the wheel of a truck and feel the difference in how it drives, how it sounds, I think it's incredible. And I think it would be really eye-opening. I mean, the second is, find a buddy that's done this before and get their insights and their experience, because it's very different than diesel operation in that sense. And it brings a lot of benefits. I think that beyond the values that these trucks bring to air quality and greenhouse gas reductions, it is just to me, a better experience, right? And so, to that point, CARB will hopefully we hosted last year, and hopefully we'll be able to host again this year with our partners at CalStart, a ride and drive event here in California. But they are around the nation, and there are opportunities. So when we have ours, we will happily invite you and your listeners, and hopefully you'll be able to find places to go. For California fleets specifically, though, I would say take a look at the upcoming regulations and start planning if you haven't already, because right now there are some great incentive opportunities here in the state, not just state incentives, but also federal incentives for trucks. And it's a great way to launch your plans. And you also, just as a side note, and everybody hears this, I think, when they begin to think about electrification of their fleets, you can never start the conversation with your utilities soon enough when it comes to infrastructure needs. So if you're starting your plan, or you've got a plan, go talk to your utility.
Just recently, I had a fleet say the exact same thing when I asked them, what should people do? And they said, get out and experience the trucks, get out and experience the charging. And so that, ride and drives, or just touching and feeling and understanding goes so far. So thanks so much for joining me, Michelle. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and let's meet up somewhere soon.
I hope so. I'm looking forward to it.
Freight Efficiency with NACFE's Mike Roth and Friends.